Hello there, and welcome back to the Judge Program for Star Wars Unlimited Level 1 Certification Track Lessons. As always, I'm your host Jonah, and today we'll be taking our first look at the Master Event document. Like how we handled the tournament regulations, you don't need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of these documents at Level 1. You'll primarily be involved with and running casual tier events, which means that penalties aren't as strict. We'll revisit this document for Level 2 when we begin to explore competitive tier events a bit more, but today we're mostly focused on remedies and education. The Master Event document is broken into two sections: the event guidelines, which provide further explanation of how events are run in concert with the tournament regulations, and the floor rules, which lay out the behavioral expectations and penalty guidelines for events. The Fantasy Flight Games organized play team uses a lot of specific terms to talk about their events. When discussing or evaluating events, it's important to use consistent language so that players, organizers, and other judges have the correct expectations for the event. There are three broad types of events: official, unofficial, and unsanctioned. Official events are supported by Fantasy Flight Games organized play and come with an event kit and instructions on how to run the event. Unofficial events are those without an official event outline, but are run by an organizer who has the support and approval from FFG. Finally, unsanctioned events are those run by organizers who do not have authorization to run official events, or otherwise do not meet the requirements for sanctioning by Fantasy Flight Games organized play. This can be something like a local club, a college or school club, that sort of thing. In addition to various types of events, which relate to how the event is tied into the organized play system, events also have a tier, either casual or competitive. Competitive events play for more significant prizes, including cash, product, or tournament points that can reward invitations to exclusive tournaments. Casual tier events are more focused on the play experience and the environment, as opposed to the prizes. There are also different event structures. Weekly play is generally a time and a place where players can find their opponents that match their intensity, format, and playstyle. Tournaments have much more rigid structures, with rounds, timers, and specified opponents. At an event, there are a lot of different roles that individuals can fill. Anyone can participate in an official event with a few exceptions. Players suspended by FFG organized play, minors unless they have permission from their legal guardian, individuals prohibited by law, individuals deemed ineligible by Fantasy Flight Games cannot participate in any way. Employees of Fantasy Flight Games, Asmodee, and any of its subsidiaries or affiliates cannot play in competitive tier events. Note that these restrictions apply to all event roles unless otherwise specified. This means that an individual on the suspended player list cannot be in a leader role at an event, nor play in it, as an example. There are several different key roles with authority in an event. There's the event tournament organizer, head judge, floor judges, and scorekeeper. The event or tournament organizer oversees the entirety of the event. They provide the venue, prizes, necessary product, hire the staff for leadership roles, manage other leadership staff, assist with the logistics of running the event, and more, generally speaking. The event organizer fills all other leadership roles by default, unless they have staff for that role. That means that in the absence of a dedicated judge or scorekeeper, the organizer has those responsibilities. A head judge is the final authority for all questions regarding rules and policies. In addition to the responsibilities of floor judge, they're also responsible for making final rulings in the case of an appeal, handling investigations, making tournament announcements, and determining how to handle unsporting conduct. Floor judge's primary responsibility is watching matches and assisting players and spectators. They should answer questions players have, taking care to only provide rules information, not strategic advice. However, if you believe the question the player asks is not the question they want to ask, you can ask for clarification. Let's take a quick detour for an example. Alex, who controls an Avenger, calls for a judge and says, "Judge, can I play Vanquish even though my opponent doesn't control any units?" How would you answer this question? Talking about how we handle calls is something that is going to get its own lesson, but this is important enough that I want to take a moment to talk about it now, and we'll go over it again in the future with more detail. So, how do you answer this question? An answer like, "You can, but you'd have to choose to defeat your own Avenger, and that's probably bad," is providing strategic advice. It's just not a clear-cut rules answer. An answer like, "Yes," is technically correct, but it's not a great answer here. The player very well might say, "Play Vanquish, defeat nothing, your turn," and then you have to step in and issue a penalty because your ruling wasn't clear enough to the player. In this situation, honestly, I would presume that the player wants to know if they can play Vanquish and not defeat anything, but that's not the question that they asked. Because the question they asked and the question I think they're asking are two different things, I need clarification before I can answer. I don't want to make an assumption, answer the question I think they're asking, and then have them go and do something wrong. A good question to ask when you're looking for clarification is something like, what are you trying to do here? And then the player can respond with, I want to play Vanquish and not defeat anything. With that answer in mind, you can now answer more accurately and say, if there's a unit in play controlled by either player when you play Vanquish, you must defeat it. We're not testing a player's ability to ask judges questions. So if you're not certain if the question they're asking is the question they intend to ask, seek clarification. It can only help. Beyond answering calls, judges also help with various logistical tasks and bring significant issues such as investigations and appeals to the head judge or event organizer as appropriate. Scorekeepers are experts in tournament software and are able to manage the event smoothly and handle any potential disruptions or errors. For most events at the local store level, this job is handled by a judge or a member of the store staff. Of course, there are also the players. Players are expected to be present at the event with all of the materials they need to play, and to play in at least one round of the event. Players who don't play in any rounds are not considered to have been a player in the event and receive no prizes, including participation prizes. You actually have to participate to receive those. Players are also expected to abide by the floor rules, play at a reasonable pace, be respectful of their opponents and tournament staff, communicate clearly, call for a judge if they need assistance, and be generally aware of the policies included in the floor rules. There will also be spectators at events. Sometimes there'll be other folks at the venue, but players in other matches in the same event also count as spectators. On-site spectators, digital spectators, and media must all abide by the same rules. They must refrain from providing outside assistance, they must not disturb games, but calling for a judge on a game is entirely okay, and must be respectful of members of staff, players, and other spectators. Furthermore, members of the media must get consent from both the event organizer and any individuals they wish to record or interview, whether they be staff, players, or spectators. Now, in Part 1, Section 3, there are some more rules that cover tournament structure, but they mostly echo what's said in the tournament regulations, so you can refer to the previous lessons for that foundational knowledge. I'm going to start this section by quoting from the Introduction to the Floor Rules. In order for the competition inherent in a game to have meaning, the competitors must implicitly agree to play the game correctly and to challenge one another and themselves within the confines and structures of that game. All of the points described in this document are intended to promote a fair and enjoyable gameplay experience for all players at any given FFG event. This is really just a fancy way of saying that it's important for the game and for organized play for everyone to have played fairly, while also maintaining a fun and welcoming experience for them. While Star Wars Unlimited doesn't currently have separate documentation for casual tier events, both Flesh and Blood and Magic the Gathering do, and I recommend checking those out to just get a little bit more insight into how other games run things. While no casual tier events require judges, having an expert on hand is incredibly valuable to the store and players, while making sure that everyone has a better time. I want to point out that the philosophy that runs through both of those documents and is echoed in the Master Event document. At casual tier events, while unsporting conduct is enforced and addressed as directly as it is at competitive events, gameplay errors and event disruptions should be handled with a gentler touch. The ability to assess the details of a specific situation and make the ruling that best upholds both the letter and the spirit of the rules is one of the most important reasons to have official judges at events. We're not going to be covering the penalties as deeply and comprehensively as we will in the future, because a key component of fostering engaging play is education, not punishment. It's about making sure that the games are good games. You should practically never issue a game loss or match loss at casual tier events, except for tardiness. In nearly a decade of judging professionally, while I have disqualified multiple players at casual events for cheating and fraud, I have never issued a game loss at a casual tier event or similar for other games. A game loss is a penalty that will haunt a player, especially one that is only loosely engaged with organized play, and such a harsh penalty for accidental errors can turn a player away from having fun with the game and participating in the community. What we're going to talk about today is how we get things back on track, so we're going to cover various errors and what the fix is, but unless otherwise noted, at casual tier events, don't really worry about issuing penalties. Our next lesson will take care of this information, add a little bit of detail to it, as we talk about how to take a judge call. Gameplay disruptions are broadly defined as a required part of the game either being overlooked or resolved incorrectly. If a player is doing this intentionally and for their own benefit, it is not a gameplay disruption, but rather unsporting conduct, cheating, and should be handled as such. Regarding gameplay disruptions, it is the responsibility of both players to maintain a clear and accurate game state. When a mistake is discovered, it should be brought to the attention of the judge, who can then evaluate the situation and determine the best remedy for that situation. The master event document lists 2 active remedies that can be applied for most gameplay disruptions. The first is Resolve Now, where the overlooked rule or ability can be applied retroactively without giving either player a significant advantage that they would not have had, were the ability resolved correctly. For example, if the active player forgot to put an experience counter on a unit due to the resolution of Gideon Hask's triggered ability being missed, and it's discovered during the regroup phase, you can pretty safely resolve that now, as neither player would receive a significant advantage. However, if the same exact issue was discovered as Gideon Hask was being attacked by a 5-power unit, resolving the ability now would turn a lethal attack into a one-sided combat. In that case, rewinding to the point of error should be considered. That other fix, rewinding, allows us to undo all actions up to the point of error, and then move forward in time, resolving the effect correctly. To be a bit metaphorical, this creates a new timeline. While players may have gained information, like cards being played from hand or what actions a player was going to take due to the rewind, they are allowed to use that information when the game continues after the fix. They are not locked into the same decisions, and this can result in a very different game than what occurred originally. If resolving now doesn't actually fix the problem, and rewinding is too disruptive, consider the third path. Leave as is. Sometimes you can't make the game better, and while it's unfortunate, it's true. One player will have an advantage, but that's okay if the advantage gained is less impactful than the unnatural advantage gained if the game were to be rewound or the ability resolved now. If the difference between advantage gained due to 2 different remedies is similar, but one favors the player who actively made the mistake, and the other favors their opponent, generally you want to fix the game so that any potential advantage gained by the player who made the error is mitigated. While drawing extra cards is listed as an event disruption, it's philosophically more in line with the gameplay disruptions. When a player adds cards to a hidden zone, hand, resource, or deck, and they were not supposed to, we have a multi-step fix. First, we determine if the opponent can unambiguously identify the location of the cards that were erroneously added to the zone. If a player drops a card from their hand and it lands on top of their resources, their opponent can likely identify it. Similarly, if they put their hand on the table while searching their deck, and then place the deck on top of a set of fanned-out cards, it's relatively easy to identify those cards. If we're able to identify those cards, we simply return them to the proper zone. However, much more frequently, the opponent will not be able to identify the cards. Perhaps the player grabbed one too many cards while searching for Darth Vader's when played ability, or perhaps they put a resource down, then picked up a card from their resources and began to replace it with a card from their hand. In these scenarios, after confirming the sequence of events and the knowledge each player has, the player who committed the error reveals the set of cards that includes the unknown cards, and their opponent selects which cards are the extra cards and returns them to the appropriate zone. With the Darth Vader example, the player would reveal the 11 cards, and their opponent would select one, which would then be shuffled into the random position of its owner's deck, and the ability would finish resolving. For the resourcing scenario, a card that shouldn't have entered the player's hand from the resource zone has entered their hand, but no card has incorrectly entered the resource zone. The fix here would be that the opponent looks at the player's hand and selects one card to be returned to the resource zone. We use this fix rather than selecting a random card because this remedy mitigates any potential advantage, because even if the extra card added was the best possible card in the deck or resource zone, the opponent can remove it from the set. While this can be punitive at times, it also really encourages players to play carefully when handling hidden information. Event disruptions are a bit broader in scope than gameplay disruptions. Tardiness is one of the major ways players can disrupt the pace of an event. By not being in their seat at the start of the round, a player may require additional time in the round. It's not fair to their opponent to reduce the amount of time that player has to complete their match, so the match gets an appropriate time extension. However, because this can be highly disruptive, a player who is more than 5 minutes late to their match receives a game loss, and a player who does not arrive by 10 minutes into the round receives a match loss and is dropped from the event. Notably, this player is not disqualified and can rejoin the event at a later point at their request. Deck lists are not required for casual tier events, and if you feel like the event does require deck lists, it's probably a good indicator that it shouldn't be run as a casual tier event. At a casual event, if a player discovers their deck is illegal, likely because they forgot to de-sideboard after a previous match or because they're missing cards, work with them to remedy the situation. Remove all cards that shouldn't be in the deck, add any cards that should, and then have the player draw cards to replace any cards that were removed from their hand in this process. If they simply have too few cards, this is likely an extremely new player. You may consider issuing a game loss as they must be able to present a legal deck. However, if they're able to add cards from their sideboard or have other cards on hand, they may be able to do so with minimal disruption to the event and get back to playing. Again, these fixes and remedies are only for casual tier play. At competitive, players have a deck list that can be referred to. Marked cards are also a possibility at casual tier events, possibly even more likely, as players at casual events are less likely to be hyper-vigilant about changing sleeves regularly, or may not even use sleeves at all. Most of the time, at casual tier play, the marked card should be re-sleeved or a proxy should be issued so that the game can continue. Slow play is also an important consideration, but at casual tier events, keep in mind that players won't always be as familiar with their own cards, much less their opponent's cards, so more time should be allowed for players to read their cards and make strategic decisions. At a casual tier event, as a judge, you should generally not need to do more than remind players to keep an eye on their pace of play or to make a decision. In a similar vein, we want to make sure that players maintain a standard of hygiene. It's important to creating a welcoming environment. Generally, players and other event participants should be considerate of their impact on others. Expectations can vary by culture or location, so consult with the organizer for specifics for your event. The unsporting conduct class of infractions is not minimized in any way, shape, or form for casual events. Players are expected to behave appropriately and maturely and to not make any other players or attendees uncomfortable, even unintentionally. Harassment, aggressive behavior, bribery, collusion, vandalism, theft, stalling, and cheating are all offenses that result in immediate disqualification. Furthermore, the event organizer should consider removing the offending player from the venue at their own discretion. This should particularly be the case for harassment, aggressive behavior, vandalism, and theft. Inappropriate behavior should result in a stern conversation focusing on education. If the player demonstrates remorse, the penalty can be downgraded, but the infraction should be tracked. If the behavior is repeated, the player should be disqualified from the event. Note that inappropriate behavior is a category that is separate from the ones listed above. Harassment has extensive definition in the master event document and can include, but is not limited to, any language or behavior that is hostile, threatening, demeaning, solicitous, or objectifying. Aggressive behavior is any act or threat of violence in any way, even those not directed at a specific individual. Bribery is offering some reward or incentive in exchange for a match result. If a player accepts a bribe, they have also committed this offense and should likewise be removed from the event. Collusion is when two players discuss the outcome of their match and artificially or randomly determine the results, not based on the game itself. Evaluating the game state is allowed, and a player is allowed to make a decision to concede on their own. However, asking an opponent for a concession at any time is not allowed. Any actions that resemble asking for a concession, even if the exact words are not used, also falls under this behavior. Vandalism and theft, like aggressive behavior, cover a broad range of threats of damage to actual damage of personal goods or the act of stealing any other person's belongings. Stalling and cheating are both gameplay-related infractions. Stalling is playing exceptionally slowly to take advantage of the time remaining in the round. Unintentionally playing slowly is not stalling and falls under slow play. Not playing quickly at the end of the round is also not stalling. A player isn't expected to have a faster pace of play as the round ends, only that their pace of play does not get slower. For a player to be cheating, they must knowingly gain an advantage and be aware that what they're doing is against the rules. A player who makes a mistake and calls attention to it when they are first aware of it, even if they do gain an advantage, is not cheating. A player who thinks that they're allowed to let their opponents make a mistake and not call attention to it is also not cheating, because they don't know what they're doing isn't allowed. In these scenarios, educate the player and remedy the situation as you would otherwise. Throughout all of these scenarios, let your guiding light be player education and reform, not issuing penalties. The goal of casual tier play is to be welcoming to all players and make sure that even the newest players have a fun and fair experience. That's a lot, and we really only covered things very briefly. This is so far from a comprehensive review of the master event document, but we'll be back in the level 2 lessons to more comprehensively cover this document with detailed examples and more in-depth conversation about philosophy. With all of this knowledge in our tool belt, our next lesson is going to be putting some of this information to use, taking a judge call. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or insights, be sure to join the Judge Community Discord and make your voice heard. Until next time, good luck and have fun.